Hey guys, welcome back to the YouTube channel. It is me, Dana. I know it's been a while. I hope your new year transition is going well, but I am excited to announce that I have a new and different episode of Mom Friend Energy today. So joining me today is a midwife. She is based in Los Angeles, where my heart
Yes.
is. And her name is Ceci. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah. So,
Absolutely.
intro about me. My name is Ceci. I'm a Los Angeles-based midwife. I've been a midwife since 2023, so I'm on the newer side, but I've been involved in birth work for about 25 years in various capacities.
Awesome. Thank you so much for joining. And you are the perfect person to have for this kind of episode. So, usually when I do these mom friend episodes, I am talking directly to the person. They are on the screen, right? And we're
Mhm.
having a conversation and we're having the mom banter back and forth. But this one is going to be a little different. So, back in November, there was an article, if you recall, that came out from The Guardian, and it spoke about an organization called Free Birth Society, and it really put a lot of light and attention on not only just the Free Birth Society, but the practice of free birth. So I made a post about it, got a little bit of traction, not a ton, but someone reached out to me in response to the video that I posted, and she swore me to secrecy. She does not want to have her identity revealed. She doesn't even want you guys to know where she lives because she feels like it would be too easily identifiable from the people that she was previously connected with. So I agreed. I agreed to not release any of those details, but she did want to make sure that her story got out there. And this is what I'm doing. But I felt like as a doula, I didn't want to just tell the story myself and, only provide certain context. I am so happy to have, been able to connect with a midwife who has done home births, right? Who knows the proper protocol and the rules and the laws of the land so that I am not getting too much dip on my doula chip and, stepping outside of my lane. I don't want to say anything incorrectly. I think a lot of people get the role of doula and midwife confused, but I will say this as a doula, at no point am I ever intentionally or even accidentally, I am not putting myself in a situation to be able to catch babies. That is not my role. That's not my lane. And I don't have the training for that, but Ceci does.
I
So
do.
I shared the messages with Ceci beforehand just so she has context. And I really want this episode to be not just about focusing on Free Birth Society, but to dispel any myths or misinformation out there about home births. Because as a doula, and Ceci, I know you agree, as a midwife, I am all for home births. I am, it's a completely when done right and in a safe practice and setting. Absolutely. I want everybody to be able to have the birthing experience that they desire as long as it's safe for them and the baby. But you'll see once we get into this conversation, you'll see that a lot of times people have misinformation or they are being influenced unknowingly to carry out their pregnancies and birth in very dangerous ways. So, without further ado, this is a very special edition of Mom Friend Energy, and we are going to be talking about, again, not Free Birth Society, but the practice of home birth, free birthing. And I need to define what free birthing is. That is birthing that is not overseen by a medical professional like an OBGYN or a licensed midwife, a trained midwife who has the regulation to be able to do that without the supervision of an OBGYN. There is also a practice out here that's widely known that's called wild birthing, which means that there are people who are not even receiving prenatal care before giving birth and are just deciding to stay at home for whatever reason. I have my own personal thoughts about it, but again, like I said, you are entitled, you have full autonomy, but I just want to make sure people understand what's safe. We also understand that a lot of times it can be for, geographic reasons. People are in rural settings and they have to make do with the resources that they have. Okay. Initially, when I posted the story, this woman reached out to me and she lives in a fairly remote area. She is from here in the United States. I won't say what state she's from, but she's in a very rural and remote area of the state that she lives in the US. And prior to having any home birthing experiences, she had 3 old school OBs. And in her words, they expected her to bow down to them. Now, I feel like when us working in this world of birth work, especially me as a doula, that comes up a lot. People's relationship and trust with the traditional model of healthcare in the system, it feels like you're not given a lot of options or choice, and you are not able to voice your concerns or opinions because the overwhelming mindset is the doctor knows best and I have to just listen to my doctor. Ceci, any thoughts on that?
I feel like that is a very common thread within the larger medical model. I feel as though in this country in particular, we have elevated physicians to a status of being completely infallible. They are the authority figure on all of these things when your care is actually supposed to be collaborative. It's not supposed to be that the provider is making all of the decisions and that the provider absolutely knows what is best. The provider is supposed to be providing you with information so that you can make the best decision for yourself and your family, and then working together, whether that is in agreement with the way in which they would do things or not. That's genuine informed consent when they provide you with the information about the risks, the benefits, and the alternatives of any part of the care that they are recommending. That can be something as simple as a screening, or it could be something larger like birth preferences. And in the larger medical model, I feel as though that informed consent piece gets stripped away, which then immediately strips away autonomy as well. So people go into situations with providers feeling as though they don't have a voice, they don't have a say-so, that their personal lived experience is not valued, the information that they're carrying forward into their visits is not valued, so they feel coerced, like to just name it instead of trying to be, sugarcoat it, they feel coerced into accepting care recommendations that are outside what they would really choose for themselves if they had more information or a voice.
Right. And she used an interesting choice of words. She said that she had been bullied into inductions, two inductions that she had that both resulted in cesareans, and from the cascade of interventions. They were from the same OBs that were, in her local hospital in her town, that were unwilling to wait. She was young and she didn't know any better. She said for her third pregnancy, she really wanted a VBAC. So she traveled over 4 hours and stayed in a hotel just so she could get care from what she called a supportive OB. And at a certain point, I guess this person's model of practice or standards of practice was not popular in the state or in the area. And he was eventually, what she says, is chased out of the hospital because he was, allowing people, like you said, to have that autonomy that some people see as risky. But her personal experience, she said the VBAC went textbook perfect. For her 4th pregnancy, she went back to the local OBs and it was, the same story that it was again. And they told her that she didn't have a proven pelvis. So you're an OB, what to like the everyday person, what does having a proven pelvis mean?
That simply means that you've given birth vaginally that they know of, right? She did have that as evidence as per her story, but that was not really taken into consideration based on the fact that the previous provider did something that was against hospital protocol. And so that information was not taken into account, but it literally just means that you have given birth vaginally through a pelvis that has been tried and true tested.
Yeah. So basically they told her, this is the way we have to do it. The state that she lives in at the time, she wanted to have a midwife, but it's illegal in the state to have a midwife after you have had prior cesareans. So she felt like she had no choice. Um, they told her no ifs, ands, or buts. You have to have another cesarean. It was not the experience that she wanted to have. And she decided to go the unassisted birth route. So from the onset of it, right? Because you hear these like stories about it's like women are just but when you hear the backstory and it becomes personalized and just an individualized thing and it's not a broad stroke, right? Mm-hmm. It becomes understandable. Like, what other options did she have? She felt like she didn't have any other choice. She didn't feel safe with the, OBs in the hospital that was in her local town. She didn't have the option of traveling the, 4 to 5 hours to the other provider because they were no longer practicing there. They got ran out of town, it sounds like, because they were going against hospital policy. She went the unassisted birth route. And unassisted birth, again, is you are not under the medical supervision of an OB. And a lot of times even, I guess, not even a midwife, right? Completely unassisted. You're doing it on your own.
Yeah, so I feel like it's really important to start this conversation with compassion by recognizing that the people that have chosen to free birth are not trying to be reckless, right? I want to be really careful about how we talk about the parents that are at the center of this story, this individual in particular, but then just everyone that has also chosen to have a free birth. Because the reasons why people choose free birth is it's more extreme than just no prenatal care, no skilled attendant. Like, they genuinely believe that they were choosing an option that was safe or safer. They weren't trying to endanger their babies. They were trying to protect themselves from what they had come to understand as a system that could harm them, right? So things like prior trauma, coercion, loss of consent, feeling ignored, dismissed, violated in medical settings is why people perceive free birth as safer, if that makes sense. In many places, the families, like this particular person said, they cannot access a respectful hospital experience, a midwife-led model of care, affordable care, or culturally concordant care, or a facility that's even nearby enough that offers maternity services. There are entire counties in the United States that are categorized as maternity care deserts, meaning there's limited or absent maternity services and providers. So when someone hears that the system is dangerous and you're safer at home, it can land as true, right? Because their lived experience within the system has been dangerous or delayed or disrespectful. They can't pay, racism, coercion, or being treated like their body is a problem to manage rather than a person to care for. So when you zoom out, that backdrop of mistrust and fear makes free birthing look very appealing, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely. And she said, even with this, her entire time that she prepared to have this unassisted birth, she knew that in her mind, if anything felt wrong, she definitely would go to the hospital to get help. So that was the plan initially for her. But unless unless something didn't change, she was going to stay home, right, and follow through with her goal and her mission. She said the unassisted birth went perfect, even better than the VBAC that she had prior to that. So she had some sort of evidence that, hey, maybe this is something that I can continue to do.
Correct.
Yeah. So then
in a previous video, I've said before that, like, home birth is safe until it's not. Everything can go smoothly in one instance and then not so much in another. And that's one of the key reasons why it's important to have a trained professional alongside you who's prepared for the birth emergencies, whether they be rare or common, so that there's a plan in place, a transfer plan, or a plan for some type of treatment. And that is the biggest risk with free birth, is that in the instances that go smoothly, like her one experience, That's wonderful. But on the flip side of that, you could have a significantly adverse outcome.
Absolutely. So then came a fifth baby. And to your point, like you just said, she was following the same rule. If something feels wrong, I'll get help. And she said the pregnancy was brutal. She had pleurisy. This is something that I had to look up because I wasn't familiar with that.
Right.
She broke a rib. She ended up with blood pressure problems. And when her labor started, it was very strange compared to her previous ones. She kept screaming every contraction, and it was pain that she was not accustomed to. It felt more painful to her. Um, so yeah, it changed her. It was a completely different experience than the fourth one. And as a doula, I tell clients that all the time. You can't compare your experience to other women, but you definitely cannot compare your previous labor and delivery experience and pregnancy experiences, to yourself. You can't say, oh, well, with this baby, this was fine, and then think that baby number 2 or baby number 3 is all going to follow you know, the same model. Everybody,
Mhm.
everybody has different experiences. So unfortunately, the fifth pregnancy didn't go well. When her water broke, she noticed that there was a little meconium. She said everything was fine. She got into the tub, sat straight, and started flipping out. She felt like she was going to die. She told her husband that she told her husband she felt like she was going to die. She felt, and I would say this is intuition. She said she felt an immediate pending of doom, and it was like a switch flipped. And she said, I have to get to the hospital right away. So she got to the hospital at 5:05. Her child was born 20 minutes later via cesarean, and come to find out, her bladder ruptured from the adhesions to my bladder, and she was bleeding internally. And I think things like that are important to be aware and mindful of. It's not to say that it's something that you should be afraid of happening to you, but these are just the type of risks that happen sometimes. If you don't have proper medical attention, how would you be able to know at home without any guidance or assistance that, hey, something serious is happening internally and we need to get you immediate medical help? I'm glad that she listened to her intuition and got to the hospital as soon as possible, because that could have definitely been a tragic turn of events. Um, in this case,
I'm grateful that she was able to recognize the danger signs, that she sought care promptly and reflected on the fact that her intuition was what led her to know when to exactly to get help, because that was a true obstetric emergency that would have required immediate hospital transfer. And if she would have been attended by someone skilled, these are the kinds of things that we would have been observing for prior to her even giving birth. Like, our threshold in home birth or any type of out of hospital, so even in a birth center, for things going wrong is actually quite low. So every check of the heartbeat, every vitals check, everything that we're doing is an assessment for continued safety. So we're assessing, is this still the place that's safe enough for you to give birth? A skilled attendant may have noticed other changes in her status that would have prompted possibly an earlier transfer to the hospital. Granted, she said there was meconium and that she had experienced meconium upon her water breaking in previous pregnancies, but that still would have been something that we would have wanted to open to the conversation for a possible transfer. With something like a bladder rupture, there would have been other signs clinically, maybe changes in her blood pressure, other things that we would have recognized as, this is something that is escalating and that we may want to change our venue because we may need a higher level of care to ensure that everything remains safe.
right. And she acknowledges, she said, the cesarean was 100% necessary. And after she had time to process, she was impressed that she had gone in with the mindset that if she ever felt like something is wrong, she'd get help and one time nothing did, and the next time something did feel wrong, and her gut feelings were accurate, right? Trusting your gut and your intuition. It was accurate. It did not fail her. She, although she initially intended to have another unassisted home birth, but we have to, again, listen to our intuition, trust our gut, and be rational and receive medical attention as soon as possible. So she felt like it was a pretty powerful testimony for her, right? Mm-hmm. Like, you feel empowered. You're like, look at, I've had these positive experiences. I've also had these scary experiences. And, you start to look to build and find community, right? With people who have similar mindsets that you have, that maybe have had the same experience, or you feel like there's people that may be interested in what interested in doing what you've done. So you feel like you can share your testimony, as she would say, or your story. So here comes Facebook, right? There's Facebook groups, there's people with, groups that run the gamut of all types of beliefs and practices and all the things. And she got connected with this one group in particular. And again, this is not a video just harping on this one group. We're just talking about, because Free Birth Society is not the only group that advocates and speaks about free birth on Facebook. It just so happens that they have become extremely popular, that they've had the most attention, and they've gained the most notoriety. So she got connected with members of the Free Birth Society, and she felt like, how cool is it that we can be this in tune to know when we need help and when we don't, if we really listen. She was sharing her story on the Facebook page, and at this point, this was before, at now it is a paid membership to be a part of the group, which I checked. It is at this point over $200 a month to be a part of this group. At the time she started, she said that it was free to be a part of the group. Mm-hmm. Her comments that she would make on the page, she said, were immediately taken down. When she even attempted to discuss things that she said in quotations, didn't trust my body because I went in, right? She went in. Oh, I'm sorry. The fact that she listened to her intuition and went in to get help, it was perceived as her not trusting her body, and her going in was like no bueno for them, right? Even though she knew that she did the right thing at that point, right? And she had a positive outcome because she did trust her body. She was told that she was allowing the system to gaslight her into believing that she saved her baby, right? So she was there, she experienced it, she knew what she felt, she knew what she experienced. These are people on the internet, right? Strangers, but after hearing her story, this is the conclusion they came up with. She said she was shocked, because do they really believe that there is never a scenario that intervention is necessary? And it seems like, the whole premise and mission of this group was home birth or nothing. That will never go to the hospital, will never transfer, even in situations like you said, Ceci, where you're like, you can tell if there are other signs or symptoms that there might be more serious issues going on, and it's, a good time to transfer now. This group seemed like it was really hell-bent on pressing you stay home no matter what. Any thoughts about that? I see your face.
Yeah, like I'm trying to phrase this nicely, but I'm just going to go in and just say this is a classic example of cult behavior. And the reason why I say that is it's not defined by belief alone, right? It's how dissent is handled, how information is controlled, and how members are treated when reality conflicts with ideology. You have the spiritual language of, not trusting your body. You have the autonomy language of birth empowerment, and it's still operating within the dynamics of a cult. Like, if we're just being really honest. There's binary thinking of this all or nothing. If you had simply trusted your body, you wouldn't have gone to the hospital, relying on this false dichotomy of trust your body or you're betraying it, free birth or violence, us or them. Um, in all honesty, in healthy birth, we understand that bodies can labor beautifully and still need help. Intuition includes knowing when something is wrong, which is what this person was able to recognize. Autonomy includes being able to change the plan. When a group insists that only one path is valid and all others represent failure or corruption, that's just classic cult logic. And then to take it a step further, there was punishment for the dissent, right? The moment she shared that this is what her experience was, that an emergency occurred, that hospital care was necessary, that the intervention saved her life and the baby's life, immediately silenced, post-deleted, accused of not trusting their body, socially ostracized. This is a control mechanism, not a debate, right? So healthy communities allow for nuance and outcomes being discussed honestly and accepting that these things have complexity and plans can change along the way. The information control, the censorship, all of that just it suppresses contradictory information, which they did. Just cult-like behavior. It was a reframing of the harm as some type of moral failure, which was gaslighting and blame inversion.
Yeah. She said, she felt like, if anything, her story was the perfect. I had a really great example. I had a really bad example, but either way, going to the hospital and trusting my intuition was like, in her mind, the hero of the story. And even talking about how great the staff was to her, they said they were treating them as, in quotations, white coat saviors. And that's interesting. I do want to say it's interesting coming from this group that, I know the term white saviors, right? I know white coat syndrome, but I don't know white coat saviors. There's women of all racial and ethnic backgrounds that are, followers and supporters of Free Birth Society, and women of all racial and ethnic backgrounds, not even so much tied into this organization, but that believe in having unassisted home births. But in my research of the organization and from what I saw, it seems to be a very white-centered, little right-leaning is starting to get, right? So the fact that they're using terms like white coat saviors, like you said, it's kind of like dog whistling a little bit. And I thought that was just like an interesting response for them to say. So yeah, she said no one was unkind to her, but there was kind of this mob mentality that you're either with us or you're against us, right? Even if you think they're being nice to you, they're still the enemy. And for me, that kind of was just like, wow, these are most of the people that she was interacting with were white women. And you think about, the statistics in this country, right? Who's really impacted by the maternal health crisis in this country are not white women, right? All the numbers and statistics are being compared to, right? Like when we say, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die in comparison to our white counterparts. So for me, it was interesting to hear, like, if there's this level of hostility and mistrust, amongst circles of women who seem to be the most protected in this country, that's a really interesting place to be in. She continued to try to post and share her comments and her thoughts, and a lot, she didn't realize how censored everything she was. She said she felt like everything was an echo chamber. Like anybody that was able to voice their opinion had to be an opinion that went along with, right, what the rest of the group thought, right? It couldn't be anything that was in any way opposite or a little different or maybe challenged the message that they were trying to push across to the larger group. at large. Um, she started to keep away from the spaces because she also was noticing that aesthetics were playing a part in this group as well. Like I mentioned, it seems to be primarily white women, right? It seems to be a certain image, very conservative, but not.
On the price point alone, it's also white women of a certain socioeconomic status. The courses that she was taking were quite pricey. I know that at the time in which she was using that particular institution as like a guidance for her free birth, it was free. And then at some point they had a $108 a month membership, but it quickly escalated to $299. And was an ongoing monthly fee. And so that also speaks to the type of person that was able to consume that information, because that's quite pricey.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there were specific words too that were censored. You couldn't use the word hospital, doctor, nurse, or midwife. They used to have to like speak in coded language, like what we see on TikTok where we can't say certain words, but place of assistance or personnel of assistance, right? Not giving anyone an official title. And to your point, you just mentioned the courses. So there was at a certain point, they grew into being able to offer courses to people who wanted to pay to become, free birth midwives. It was almost like a midwifery course that they created. But again, the price was, I have to double check and I will put it on the screen here, but it was astronomical. And, for it to not be like accredited and have, not based in any sort of evidence backed research. It really like pigeonholes like exactly like who your target audience is and the people that are going to be able to even afford to take the course in the first place. She said that even if you try to explain why you chose to have a free birth due to previous hospital experiences. So even if it's like, hey, I'm on your side, I went through this, I had the trauma, and now I'm here. You had to heavily censor your story and really, describe like basically something that would be strong enough of a position for them to be like, I had such a bad experience that I would never go back. She didn't have, as soon as she said she didn't have another unassisted birth, she was treated like a traitor, right? Like it becomes like this mob mentality. And she did mention, like you previously said, that it was cult-like. So the video that I posted that I guess, came across her timeline or her feed somewhere, and I was quickly corrected by other doulas that had more information about this. I said, well, I don't know that it's so much a cult. It just sounds like good marketing, like, people that know how to weave together a story and be persuasive and get people to be drawn in and connected to them. A lot of times, if you're a very charismatic person and you can hold people's attention and come across as like, the girl that women want to be friends with, or build a community that people want to be a part of, and you can also tap into like those emotional and sensitive boundaries that people have, like if you can really tap into that and seep into people's consciousness in that way, I feel like a lot of times the world is yours. And it's a lot of power that people can have, and they can either do dangerous things with it or they can do positive things with it.
They relied very heavily on the teaching of autonomy being sacred, and that is my stance. Autonomy is sacred. But what they also did was they stripped all of what actually encompasses autonomy. Autonomy requires accurate information and real options, not fear-based information, which is what they relied very heavily on. They used a series of misinformation, isolation, and monetization, right? What's most troubling about all of what was shared was that this information was being disseminated to a combination of vulnerable families that often had been traumatized or priced out of care or were in environments where they did not have access to care. They were being told that they're sovereign and must take radical responsibility for any outcome, while also being discouraged from seeking help inside of a paid ecosystem that was profiting from their distrust of the larger medical model. When you really break it down, that's a public health issue. And it's because that's an ideology that is teaching that calling for help is a betrayal. It increases the likelihood that families will wait too long in a true emergency, and that if someone was to choose to hire support, such as from this group, they were thinking that they were getting a trained professional, i.e. these midwifery classes that they were teaching, only to discover when it is too late that the person that they are taking information from has absolutely no life-saving skills. It's a systems failure. It's an ethics failure, and not at all informed choice.
Right, right. And just going back to and for context, you guys, I'm looking down on my phone because again, because this woman says she does not want her identity to be revealed or any, certain details. I am looking through the messages. I didn't want the interview just me, to be just me reading the messages off the screen. So I am looking, and as you're talking, like everything that you're saying right now is really falling in line with, what she said, where it's um, really building onto that ideology, because why would the censorship be so strong that even using the word hospital was considered dirty? It kind of like, it, even if you are not in a what's deemed a high risk situation, if you have any sort of any sort of interaction with, like a medical personnel, like a nurse or a doctor, it conditions you to be, on high alert, like, right, like you're expecting something bad to happen. You are just going in with already a certain level of distrust, or just knowing, even if it does not serve in the best interest of you and your child in the long run, that you did the best thing by staying home no matter what, because the hospital is just so bad that even birthing and going through, I just, it's sad to read the stories from the original article where you just think like the excitement and anticipation and nervousness of, all the months of going through pregnancy and the trimesters, to have the outcome be like, you know who knows, maybe you went to the hospital at the right time, and it wouldn't have to be a tragedy like this. But their mindset in this organization was just like, stillborn deaths are, we accept whatever comes with our decision. We, even if that means birthing stillborn babies, we're still not going to the hospital.
Right. That was part of what they deemed as radical responsibility. And the thing is, with a home birth or a birth center birth, midwives are not trained to have the ideology of home birth or birth center or bust. It's about safety. And at any point where we recognize that the environment that we have chosen to birth in is no longer safe, we facilitate transfers. We try to facilitate transfers of care with compassion and with integrity and in the spirit of collaboration with the providers that we're transferring into. So the way in which this organization framed the need for a higher level of support was quite damaging. And that's not just for this client in particular whom shared her story, but for all of the various people that have had adverse outcomes in their pregnancy, having followed information of this sort, not just Free Birth Society, because there are numerous others. The only reason why this one is really being talked about the most right now is because there have been a couple of lawsuits that have come down. There have been write-ups in major news publications like The Guardian. So it's being brought to the forefront more, but these organizations have existed for a number of years. And I feel like one of the main reasons why that's even possible is just because our I caution saying that our maternity care system is broken. I feel as though our system is unfortunately working exactly the way in which it was designed. And it's shaped by access and legality and not always centering what's best for the individual, because we are a litigious society and a lot of the protocols and things that are in place are written by attorneys and not by actual healthcare providers. And yeah, like
And that,
it's so many moving parts to all of it. I could write a book on all of the things that are issues within our system that make organizations like this seem very appealing or like the safer option.
absolutely. Yeah. I tell clients that all the time too, that hospital policies are there uh, because they're going to do, even if the risk factor is 1%, right, of doing something, they are mitigating risk to the highest degree possible. Because like you said, like you can't listen to a radio or step outside without hearing a commercial saying like, if you have a slip and fall, call this lawyer. You see a billboard, every corner you turn, it's a billboard like sue, sue, sue. You trip on somebody's steps, sue them. You fall at work, sue your job. You get into an accident, sue. And corporations are, a hospital before it's anything is absolutely a corporation, a company that has to protect its assets, right? And to be able to continue to serve the community, it has to, protect the financial ability to be able to do that, right? They can't just go around and pay major lawsuit settlements because they wouldn't be able to stay in business if that were the case.
Yeah, so I just want to clearly say that the way in which we can reduce the demand for free birth is to address the drivers, right? Expand access to midwife-led care. Maternity deserts are real. People can't choose safe options if they don't exist, right? That's just a fact. Make respectful care a non-negotiable. A huge portion of the free birth pipeline is trauma. The women reported describing prior births as violating or coercive. When consent is broken, trust collapses. That's just a fact. We need to normalize collaborative, low intervention options. Many people don't want to birth without help. They just want to birth without coercion. I literally made a TikTok about this, I think, yesterday. When we can offer that, people choose the care that's actually safest for them. We offer that through midwifery care, through doula care, through continuity models, through trauma-informed care pathways, and then providing honest counseling about risks without fear. As clinicians, I would just have to say, I respect your autonomy. I will not shame you. And here's what I'm worried about and why, and still allowing people to make choices that don't align with any of the information that I have provided. So it's wanting an out-of-hospital birth, seeking a licensed trained midwife with clear emergency protocols and transfer relationships. Everyone deserves autonomy and safety, and you shouldn't have to choose one or the other. The two should be intertwined. They live together.
I agree. And it's like what you said with labeling things as, like obviously anyone's experience that gives them trauma is to be um, respected. And also you need to take note of that, right? To change how things are happening. But I think back to my original point about what this group did really well in particular is marketing, right? So taking buzzwords and terms like, saying that things were triggering to them, and even things that were being done without consent, that they felt without consent. They were even going as far as calling it, medical sexual assault, which is that's a very strong term. And that is something that can really, depending on if you have experience with that, if it can like kind of make the hair stick up on your arms, right? Like, um, scary.
that they were attempting to censor language that would be considered triggering to people while using language that was very triggering. Like
Extremely triggering.
just
Right.
reading
'Cause she noticed.
reading through the messages was like, wow, like the censorship of words that could be triggering was also very triggering.
Right, right. And she mentioned too, she said if the mere word hospital is triggering to you, then that might be a sign that, you are not ready to birth on your own without some sort of support or assistance. If just the word hospital itself is triggering to you. Um,
They used language as a weapon. They literally weaponized the language to enforce conformity, um, to prevent life-saving care for people, to silence harm to the group, not harm to the individuals that were taking this information. Like they literally enforced the ideology of loyalty over the demand of survival.
right, right. Exactly. Right. Um, and we've seen this, especially around the time of COVID when we all kind of, we're in this space now where more things are virtual. We are connecting with people via Zoom, people who have been friends or connected via social media platforms and may have never even met in person, but that whole idea of like we're a community, we get each other, and that becomes stronger, like you said, the loyalty, then even trusting yourself, right, is more important. She mentioned, so in that article, there was a story that was included the experience of Journey Moon, which was a tragic stillborn death that when you read the circumstances of it and, how there was messaging happening back and forth throughout the entire labor process, right? And the birthing person, the mother, knowing that something was not right, right? And knowing like something's off. Are you sure it's going to be okay? And you have somebody in like a different part of the country, right? That's not there with you. And to your point, that does not have any life-saving or real medical training themselves to say, no, it's normal, it's fine. Just stick with it. Don't, stay home. It'll happen. And the baby unfortunately was lost. She was there during that time. She witnessed it play out. So she realized how crazy it was and she spoke out. This is when she started to, really, I don't want to say turn against, but really like be more explicit in saying like, this is like, in her words, it's bullshit. This is bullshit, right? This is crazy. They think that they can tell women what to do with their bodies. And then at this point, it is now becoming hypocritical because the whole purpose of it is we have autonomy, right? Where we should be able to make choices for ourselves. If, the medical or the healthcare institution is the boogeyman and we don't want to listen to doctors because they're not respecting us and our bodies and they're not listening to us, you're kind of doing the same thing, but on the opposite end of the spectrum, right? Instead of encouraging somebody to get the help that, possibly could have been life-saving for that baby.
I mean, particularly in the case of Journey Moon, it's that the birthing person, her water broke and the water was brown, and she talked about having foul smelling amniotic fluid, which would be a sign of infection, right? So any trained professional that would have been in that space would have recognized that immediately as infection or possible meconium, which would become a reason to transfer to prevent respiratory distress or to quickly identify respiratory distress so that this baby could receive life-saving care right away. And instead, when that birthing person reached out to the powers that be of this organization, they were told everything is fine and not to go in. And she explained that she was in excruciating pain and that she had been in active labor for 6 days with ruptured membranes, which is absolutely unheard of in a medically managed birth. Absolutely unheard of. And then a step further was when this client decided to go into the hospital to seek care, was told to fudge the date in which they ruptured, to fudge all of the information about the care that they had received and the information that they had been provided from this organization.
Yeah.
That is also coercion for protection of the organization, right?
Right. If anybody is telling you to lie about details, right? Important details, that is a huge red flag. More people started speaking out at that time, and she noticed that comments were being deleted again and members were being removed from the group, right? So it's like, again, back to your point, the emphasis is placed more on the loyalty than it is the actual safety and protection of these group members. She said that she found it ironic, though, when they started selling classes on the unassisted birth. She found it ironic that they had a disclaimer on the classes to consult your healthcare provider, but then would actively not allow any mention of a provider, right, in the class.
Yes.
So, yeah, that.
I chuckle because I'm like, that is a loophole that they were attempting to use in order to uh, avoid any type of liability in the event of a negative outcome, right? It's literally just like the fine print at the bottom saying, contact da, 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 so that if anyone ever had a negative outcome and said, we received this information from this person and this person at the Free Birth Society, that they would have some type of deniability by saying, yeah, we sell these courses. This is the information that's in it. However, we are not licensed healthcare providers and we're not providing medical advice. There is a footnote that says to contact your provider. But what was happening within the groups was very different, right? And that deletion of comments was also kind of a way for them to delete any paper trails or track record to also offer them that same type of deniability without that fine print.
Right. Exactly. I also it also, in reading the article and also having this conversation with this mother, the so you're taking you said radical accountability, right, of whatever the outcome is, but women that would have that would experience tragedy, right, loss, it almost seemed like they were left with no support. They were left with no, there was mention of like women that like wanted to talk and process like, how could this have happened? She said that while she was there, those women would often be criticized, right? And it was said that it was something that they failed to do, or they, weren't fully bought in. Like there was they didn't fully trust. They had a lack of faith or belief in their body. So it's their fault, right? It's pointing the fault back to the woman, which is so unfortunate because it also pairs in line with, we see this in society, like the misogyny. You talk about women who, a lot of women that experience postpartum depression, reasons that are given, it's like it's your fault. It's because you didn't do this. It's because you didn't breastfeed that you had postpartum depression. It's because you didn't encapsulate your placenta. All the like crazy ideas that people have about why something like that would happen. In one of the founders of the community, I feel like a lot of these stories have come to light recently because she unfortunately experienced a stillbirth earlier in 2025. So it's almost like, okay, well, where did you lack in your faith then, in your trust in your body, right? Like, the way that you kind of ostracized women after they, bought into your beliefs, your group, paid their money, thought that they were a part of this community. And then, just like that, it was like, oh, you did something wrong and you're out.
I think it's important to like circle back to what I said before about one of the tenets of a cult about reframing harm as a moral failure. They reframed the harm, such as any of these adverse outcomes, to, a failure of faith, a lack of purity, weakness. That ideology keeps their message intact at the expense of human life, right? And when you say that there was seemingly no support after an adverse outcome, there wasn't. There really wasn't. That at that point is when people became ostracized from the group. Um, it was at that point where they were betrayed, shamed, and there was the loss of belonging to the group instead of support.
Yes, yes. She talks about an example where there was criticism for someone getting an x-ray for a broken rib while pregnant. And you would think with all that's going on in this area, if there's a broken rib, like the risk of something being punctured, or you need to see what's going on down there. But
Or just not wanting to be in excruciating pain.
or
Having a broken rib is
absolutely that.
incredibly painful, and that has an impact on literally every single breath that they take. So I would never advise someone to not seek an x-ray if they suspect they have a broken rib, period, but especially not during pregnancy.
Right. And they were told to take arnica as a relief instead of, seeking medical attention. I am all about homeopathic and herbal and all of this, but like, I also don't have to suffer unnecessarily if,
Very much the same. My minor is in botanical medicine. I firmly believe that plant medicine is real medicine, that plant medicine is powerful medicine, but I would not advise arnica for a broken rib.
right.
I just wouldn't. I'm like, my mind is blown by so much of this. I sometimes find myself to be kind of at a loss for words because it's just frustrating that it's being communicated to these people that your story threatens us, so we must silence it, right? And that is to protect the monetization of this organization. Because one of the key pieces that we haven't yet shared was how much revenue was generated by this organization in a 7-year period. Do you happen to remember the figure?
I don't. I wish I had. I'm going to put it up here.
I happen to remember the figure because I
Okay.
was like, holy moly, if evidence-based care was to receive this type of funding, do you understand what we could do? They generated $13 million in a 7-year period
Wow.
with
Wow.
the selling of these memberships to this organization.
Absolutely.
So
Wow.
it's a substantial amount of money. So there was something there to protect, something substantially there for them to protect, right?
Whew, goodness. Wow. I want to ask because again, we're not just focused on this particular organization. I want to say, I did ask, how are other unassisted birth groups as far as addressing complications and interventions? Are they this extreme? And she said, most are similar, but not as bad. Most have restrictions on language. She found that the more realistic groups were ones that were for unassisted and midwifery assisted. So there is a balance. It's, you can be on the extreme end of it, but it's also like, hey, find a midwife. They seem more reasonable and realistic without the insane rules and agenda. Um, but she left all of the groups that she was a part of. She said actually, if she didn't just join Free Birth Society, she was a part of different groups, right? It
Mhm.
was just the Free Birth Society was just the one that was most popular. It had the most activity. So, it was easier to engage. And that's kind of like how social
Right.
media works, right? If you keep getting those hits of dopamine and those updates, you're going to keep going to that page. You're going to keep, contributing. So they knew what they were doing.
Correct.
Um, but she said she did leave all of them except for the dual ones, assuming that means the ones that were, included midwifery care, because of how extreme it all felt. And she said she thinks anyone who is planning unassisted needs to have a realistic expectation and defined plan of when they'll seek help For her, it was, if I feel like anything is wrong. So, that's important, right? Don't just go into it with this. I tell clients this too, even if you are planning to have a hospital birth, yes, we're going to make a birth plan together, but please don't ever kid yourself into thinking that this birth plan is going to be the way, that your experience is going to play out, right? Always keep in mind that pivots have to happen, that, things happen, but being so firm and staunch on I'm going to stay home no matter what is, can be really dangerous. And if you're a part of any group that is not offering space or flexibility for anything else, I just feel like you need to kind of evaluate the information that you're taking in, because it could be detrimental to you at some point if things don't go off without a hitch this time, right? Her first unassisted home birth went incredible, right? If that were the only experience that she ever had, then maybe, she would look at all of this and be like, yeah, there's nothing wrong because I did it and everything went fine. And I knew that, I was going to stay home no matter what. But it was that next unassisted birth where things took a turn for the left. And she said, okay, I have to just, trust my body and realize that something dangerous is happening.
That is one of the most beautiful parts of the story. Well, it's kind of the only silver lining is that she really listened to her body, that she was able to differentiate between a normal labor and danger, and that she sought help immediately without any hesitation, and then also was able to accept an emergency surgery without hesitation, right? Then also to reflect on that experience and later affirm that the intervention was necessary and that it saved her life and her baby's life. So she did all of the things exactly right, all of them. And so it's very disheartening to, read the text and realize that she was met with such hostility for saving her own life and saving her baby's life.
Yeah, she said, it's still wild how they treated me. I was so blindsided too because they really pushed the sense of community and support. So basically to have all these women turn their back on me because I got help, which is crazy. You did what was best for you and your child, right? And I guess the betrayal to them was you didn't do what was best for the community, which to me feels like that's not a community I would want to be a part of, right? A community would be making sure that the energy and interest is we want to make sure you and the baby are safe no matter what, right? Like we can share certain ideologies, but when it all comes down to it, what's most important is we are having members of this group. And I feel like it's what legitimizes you, right? Like everybody needs to be safe. Everybody needs to be safe and needs to be making rational decisions. She said her purpose for sending me these messages were to make people aware of how extremist and predatory these groups are. She didn't think, she wasn't there when the courses were happening or they were starting, but she noticed a big difference in herself and many of the others on the groups that she wasn't relying on members to validate her. And there were so many people that were a part of that group that were relying on the members to validate her or tell her what to do. She often got the vibe from some of the posts on there that the person had no idea what to do, whatever the situation was, and was looking for answers, which is exactly what the big concern is. If people are looking to this group as an authority with the answers, it's dangerous. And they're always going to push, right? That birth should be a free birth. It should be unassisted. You should never get help. You should never go to the hospital. You should just stay in there, trust your body, listen to your body. And we know that that's not going to be the case with everyone, right? Like things are going to, in some cases, unfortunately, sometimes things are going to take a turn where you're going to have to put your trust in a medical professional, right? To make sure that you are staying safe. So now, thankfully, where she lives, the law in her state is passed so that midwives are, are legally an option and are available across the board. So it lessens the chances that somebody will be forced to be put in a situation like this where they feel like they have no other option. Their back is, up against the wall, or they have to either, choose for them the lesser of two evils. In a lot of cases, I feel like people find that, whatever the experience is that they want to avoid from having a hospital birth, they feel like, they're not happy to go along with it if that's their only choice. She sent me some articles, and she briefly mentioned, I read a story about a woman who was a part of the group as well, who had a son who seemed like he was on the spectrum, but it wasn't diagnosed, and he did have Down syndrome. This group had grown to such a point where they had a daycare, right? I don't think they were licensed to do anything in the education
No.
realm. But because this child was special needs and was not, he was not a typical, he was neurodivergent. He was not neurotypical, excuse me. They, he was not welcome to be a part of their community. The mom was isolated and ostracized. It just felt, very like, if you don't fit the standard or the image of what we are trying to portray, that we're having these unassisted births and we are birthing these picture perfect, I'm assuming, little white children, then you have to find somewhere else to be.
Yeah,
And that was
escalated to them purchasing land and opening up a preschool. And
yeah,
this child, I believe, had a chromosomal abnormality and was not welcomed.
yeah, which is heartbreaking. It's like it's very heartbreaking to hear. And again, even with when you say radical acceptance of any outcome, that should be accepted as well, right? That is the radical acceptance of an outcome. So it just, to me, seemed very hypocritical of like, well, you're not accepting radically what the outcome of this woman's pregnancy was, and her childbirth. There's also allegations of people coming to work on the land and not being paid, right? Almost like a commune kind of, which then does absolutely get into cult territory, which is something, people should also, I don't believe in free labor for anything. Like I don't, even with an internship, I feel like interns should at least be paid a stipend. So to uproot and move my life to move on somebody's land, and I'm a follower of them, and I'm expected to manage some land and do some farm work or whatever she had them doing and not get paid, is very questionable.
Actually, I did a little bit more digging, and not only were they not being compensated, they were actually paying the organization to be there, by enrolling in these courses, by enrolling in a very pricey doula course, at
I was
$6,000.
gonna say $6,000, which is crazy.
Right. And also to enroll in a $12,000 midwifery course, which there are midwifery schools, legitimate accredited midwifery schools, that are a fraction of that cost. So
Yeah.
shocking, to see that this is what was happening. And I have so many thoughts on all of this. Like, I was like, the real risk in all of this was the isolation of these people, not the physiology. Like, physiological birth can be safe, VBAC can be safe, out of hospital birth can be safe. But the isolation is never safe. Like, this story just quickly exposed how quickly support can kind of turn into an echo chamber. And people got punished for acknowledging that emergency existed, and then not being able to transition to a different environment when that environment that they chose becomes unsafe, is inherently dangerous, because that is making honesty forbidden. That's not community care. It's dogma. It's not a failure of trusting the body. It's a failure of access to VBACs, rural maternity infrastructure, legal recognition of midwifery being the way it was at the time, not having like true trauma-informed obstetrical care or respectful informed consent, the families were not provided with real options to choose skilled support. Their options were actually stripped away in a weird way. Um, and the people just, they do their best with what remains. And that's where the real responsibility of it all lies. It doesn't lie with the birthing person. It lies within the system that criminalizes midwives, enforced blanket VBAC bans, and threaten surgery as some type of a punishment and conflate liability with safety. It just left so many people without lawful care.
Yeah. Yeah. And to kind of tie it into, you mentioned a post that you posted. I just posted something today because there's Dr. Oz, who is a part of the Trump administration, announced that they are starting a program where robots will be replacing OBGYNs in very rural, like you said, maternal care deserts in counties in Alabama, who which has terrible maternal mortality rates. I think the third worst in the nation. So robots, right? Like the whole idea of replacing human care with a robot to perform ultrasounds and
Just wonder, I'm being facetious with this one, but I wonder what the primary racial demographic of this community in which they plan to roll out the use of robots might happen to be.
right, absolutely. But you just think of like you said, it just leaves so much space for not only just like substandard care, but also abuse.
I
Definitely
mean,
not.
humans make questionable clinical decisions all the time. You cannot fathom leaving these major decisions up to a robot. I mean, whew, my goodness gracious.
Yes. So I want to wrap it up on that. I also wanted to point out to what you said as well. Like when we talk about the training, people spending $6,000 and $12,000 for this training that, I believed also in traditional midwifery. So I'm not just saying like you have to fall within this, you have to be certified and recognized by a certain, governing board or body, because this was work that was done for centuries, right? This is work that was happening before hospitals existed, right? Before there was, a U.S. healthcare system. This is how a lot of us were born. Even after that, when you talk about segregation, and hospitals did not want Black and brown people to be treated in their facilities, right? So it was the granny midwives that were taking on this, this primary task and duty for their communities. But there was a certain level of training, there was apprenticeship, there was, like traditions that were passed down from generation to generation. It's unfortunate that a lot of that is probably lost now. But one thing that I read from the article, not so much the interview that I had with this mom, the story of the woman who birthed at home but didn't know that she had to birth her placenta after, and almost lost her life, right? That is so basic and standard, right? If you've had any sort of interaction or experience in childbirth, if you've delivered a child yourself, or even if you've just like taken a basic, class. So it's like, what are you guys paying $6,000 and $12,000 for? And that person did not even know that they had to birth their placenta. That was very dangerous and unnecessary. That would have been
And completely unnecessary. Yeah. So I love the fact that you touched on the idea of like traditional midwives. That's why I'm very intentional with the language that I use when I discuss midwives, and discuss the various types of midwives that there are in the country, because there is very deeply rooted historical context related to the legislation and regulation of midwives. Um, I don't believe that the only safe, competent midwives are midwives who've gone through some type of formal educational training and are recognized by some org or licensed or certified or fill in the blank, that there are midwives who have apprenticed, who have been shown traditional means of being in attendance at a birth that are very safe. So I intentionally use the word trained as opposed to licensed,
Okay.
because someone can be licensed as a midwife and still not provide safe care. Someone can be trained as a midwife and not provide safe care, but just someone that is at least a trained, experienced provider can be safe, if that makes sense.
Yes, yes. We don't want to, exclude anybody, because I do, like I said, I feel like it's a shame that a lot of the traditional information is lost at this point, right? So
Some of it's being brought back and being rebranded. A lot of the older traditional ways of being with people and managing births are being brought back into modern midwifery and just rebranded as, this newfangled way of providing care, when it's like, yeah, great. That's something that we've actually been doing within midwifery care for hundreds of years before midwifery was ever even legalized as a profession. But sure, we'll rebrand it.
right, exactly. Whatever you say. Well, I am so happy that I was able to go through this with you, have your experience as not only just a trained midwife, but also a licensed midwife, right? I think it's so important. And I hope it comes across to anyone watching this that we are not just saying, hey, home births are bad, unassisted births are bad, but you have to really, you can't be too extreme on one end, where it's like you're going to follow along with one thing and not trust your gut and your intuition. And like you said, I think the one positive and beautiful part of her experience was she knew. Like, there's nothing more affirming when it's just like, I knew what I knew, and look at the difference it made. I listened. It's so empowering. And you just have to be careful, even if it seems like it is the most the most like popular, or like if it anything challenges you to go against your best judgment, right, then it's just not for you, right? And it's okay to not be a part of communities that are, every community is not for everybody. And to just completely give away to how women were sending messages, and it just seemed like they knew nothing about nothing, and to completely give away our power and to allow somebody to have all the answers is a very vulnerable place to be in. And a lot of times when somebody has that level of power, they don't always use it in a healthy or safe way. And it just seems like this really went off the rails with maybe the intention was we're just going to build a community. But then once they saw how much money could be made from it, right, it just kind of grew legs and kind of took off from there. But I'm going to send this to our anonymous mom. But I want to thank her so much for sharing her story. I hope that I know for sure I didn't add any like details, right, for anybody to be able to identify
Right.
who you are. But I hope that you feel like we talked about your experience and honored it in a certain way that came across as non-judgmental, because those of us in this side of the birthwork world, doulas especially, this is a judgment-free zone. Even if I personally don't agree with or not even so much agree, but if I personally know that things would not work best for me, or would be in my best interest, it is not my place as a doula, as a birth worker, as a mother, to judge any other mother's decision on what she feels is best for best for her and her child. So
Yeah,
thank
I
you
feel
so
like
much.
final note for me would be like the truth that we have to hold in all of this is that birth is powerful, bodies are intelligent, emergencies still happen, right? Supporting autonomy means supporting both physiological birth and timely intervention, and not pretending that one cancels the other out. Her story it was not a cautionary tale. It was not about trusting your body too much. It was literally a warning about what happens when choice disappears. It's when the only voices that are willing to speak up and be the loudest are not the most honest voices in the room. And so I feel like as midwives, as advocates, as clinicians, our obligation is not to push people toward or away from any single model of birth. It is our obligation to make sure that no one is ever feeling forced to choose between dignity and safety.
Yes. Yes. Wonderfully said. Well, we did it. Finally, another episode of Mom Friend Energy. Ceci, thank you so much. I have to say this. I haven't talked to you this previously about it. I feel like I'm putting you on the spot. I would love to maybe, maybe monthly or, however often you're available, just to have you come on. I love having the doula and the midwife perspective of things. I feel like it really helps to have people understand that there is a difference, right? And also not get caught up in the danger of, feeling like, a doula can do all of these things when we are not supposed to be doing all the things, right? And that
Right.
a midwife is, like if you feel like you are beholden to this limited amount of options, that you have the knowledge that could probably enlighten people to say, like, you have other options, and this is what, this could be best for you. So you guys stay tuned. I'm going to have to talk to Ceci online about it, but I would love to just, if it's, like I said, once a month or however often you're available, once every other month, to maybe just do some chats like this, find some topics to really talk about, to be able to go back and forth with one another.
Absolutely. Like I can tell you now, I'm down. So we'll work out the logistics.
Well, thank you guys so much. There's more videos coming, I promise. It won't be this long again. I just had to get through the holidays, get through the new year, all the things, but we're back, and I'm so glad that this is our first episode and first interview back in 2026. So powerful, so wonderful. You guys take care, and I will see you soon.